Welcome to the memory team meeting. It's February already. That's crazy. All right, we'll jump right into it. We have a few topics here. I think they're all pretty well related though. So wanted to get everybody's thoughts. We had earmarked this meeting to talk about what's next, what we can wrap up for 1310, what we can realistically wrap up for 1310. And I think most of it is just the memory savings are laid out in the description here, so we can run through those again. And so I guess the question is, folks want to run through the epic? Do you want to run through the billboard and talk about where we are with current issues? You want to verbalize what you're typing out, Camille? You want to verbalize what you just wrote?
Yes, I have probably another low-hanging fruit, kind of building on the GitLab exporter stuff, and basically just copying the settings and pre-configuring them. But I'm gonna open issue and I'm gonna try this, but I'm kind of expecting this is something that we never look at. But looking at the GitLab exporter stuff, I'm expecting this to be pretty noticeable improvement, especially for the 2 gig. And basically a low-hanging fruit, probably it would be even good enough to just put a malloc conf, the value that we kind of figure out with materials, what would be the simplest one.
Okay.
I wouldn't mind going through the billboard quickly and seeing where everybody is at, and maybe just do a quick run if it actually loads.
I have a stale version. I don't know if
I tried, I removed my issue that was causing the problem. I tried the solution that Anvan suggested, but I cannot set the ordering of the issues, so I couldn't apply the workaround. So my issue is not visible at the moment.
Yeah, we'll talk about it.
It got fixed. It's there. Okay, cool.
Well, the bug should be fixed in 13.9, but it is not making my life a better place. Okay.
Right.
Cool.
Alexi started commenting on this one. You want to verbalize what you were writing, Alexi?
Yeah, I tried to get fixes for things that got broken on single mode, mostly metrics and readiness checked, but I feel that I'm stuck completely because I spent a lot of time just trying to figure out how Prometheus is keeping the metrics, but I didn't get any meaningful answer because I got conflicting results. On GDK it works one way, on Omnibus it works different way. Matthias hinted me just a couple minutes ago it may be something with clean up of the metrics, but I will look at that today, but I will probably want to pair with someone tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm totally open for this. We can pair on it. We can figure it out together.
It's a total bummer for me. I don't know
how.
And just let me just answer one question. Do I understand correctly that the issue we are trying to solve under this title is this? For example, if we're just enabling single mode, what do we need to fix, or how do we need to update documentation for it to work for the customer, right? Because that's what we're trying to do, right? Because we are not actually enabling single mode itself. We are trying to understand what gets broken, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because it was a bit of a blind spot, right? Because we didn't really know what additional work would fall out of this, because we weren't completely, we had some ideas, but we weren't completely sure what would break.
By itself.
So
yeah,
I think we should for now just document, whatever is easy to fix, I think we should just fix. But if there's bigger things that fall out of this, let's say, just for the sake of example, if metrics would be broken beyond repair, and then we would have to say, well, it takes probably another milestone to fix this, then I wouldn't do this now. I would just create an issue, so at least we have it logged, so that at least that we have a plan for how to move this forward. So I think it started out a bit experimental kind of researchy. But yeah, any kind of smaller things we can fix, it probably makes sense to just do them.
Alexi,
What was the question, Alexi? Was it the focus of this issue or the outcome of this issue?
No, I mean, I just wanted to say that this issue may sound a bit vague because let's say, what we are trying to do here, we are trying to fix this, whatever is under the node section. Like we are trying to either document some of these things, for example, if they seem perfectly normal. Let's say memory killer is no longer applicable, of course, like it will. So we just need to update documentation probably for customer for running this mod. But for some things, we are trying to provide a fix, which is tricky. So I just wanted to be on the same page. So what I'm doing here under this issue. Camille, what did you want to ask?
I wanted to suggest that we meet after this meeting and we just fix Prometheus.
Okay.
So you're gonna be with one less problem.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But I think what Alexi is saying is, so the way I understand you, Alexi, is this the kind of the exit criteria for this issue are not super clear, right? Because we know what the goal is. Like we want to ultimately be able to run Puma in single mode because we have enough evidence that this would be very impactful in terms of memory savings in some environments. But it might turn out to be a lot of work to fix all of it, and some things are not maybe even entirely clear, like how to fix them, whether that's just a documentation update or that requires some change in settings. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. And following this logic, did we decide how we'll run it for the customer? Will we provide some instruction or will we do some, some?
Okay, I think my perception is like, if we have to run Puma single mode, it's about running Puma single mode. We may have some drawbacks of running that, we may document that, but the idea is like, we have to run that. If metrics are broken, we have issue for fixing metrics and figuring out like when we want to fix them. But then my question is like, can we run Puma single mode today for the 2 gig if you would have to document that and document caveats associated with that?
Yeah.
I share that understanding.
Right. Should this? Yeah, I agree. But I'm just wondering if that should be an epic instead, because like it's just like these issues that drag on for like multiple milestones are maybe just not correctly sized.
Yeah,
we have the Puma epic.
We want just to provide some documentation for the customers how to run single mode and what gets broken and link according to issues, right? Sort of.
Yeah, so I think my understanding is the best way to, or from a high level, I think the best way to iterate here is to say, okay, if we turn, like, can we turn on Puma in single mode? And I think the answer is yes, right? If we do, what breaks? If there is very simple like fixes to unbreak them, we can maybe do that, right? If there are certain things that are just broken, right, and there's more work involved, I would open an issue and say, metrics are broken, if you do this, here's the issue, and document it as a caveat. Because I think what we want to do is, especially for this, you may want to run this in a memory constrained environment, right? And then you should be aware of the caveats. But actually, for example, if you don't need metrics anyways, right, you may not care. It's like, fine, I don't mind, I'm going to deactivate metrics, right? But I think that's good enough for the first iteration. So I would keep it on like in that tight scope and say like, can we do this? Yes. All the drawbacks go maybe into the larger epic here, the like reduce Puma's memory footprint, but we don't need to fix them now. And we can decide if we even want to fix them.
I mean, in that case, it's already done because all you need to do is disable this initializer that verifies the cluster.
You probably need to update some documentation, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay. It would just be a documentation issue. Then.
And also readiness check would fail us, right? Probably because it's broken as well, but you may rely on it.
Yeah, that's something.
My suggestion is. My suggestion would be just open an MR for the documentation. Maybe coordinate with Camille because that may want to go into the how to configure in a memory constrained environment docs as well. Right? I don't quite know where the best way is to document it, but I would add the documentation and then just close and move on.
Okay, that's fair enough. Then that my mistake, because I misunderstood, because I would consider if metrics are not working, that to me is like fairly broken. But I agree, like maybe in some environments that's not that important. But yeah, then we only need documentation, because even the readiness probe, that's something for Kubernetes. Like you don't need this, you don't need a readiness check. You could just document as well. Well, this is also broken if you enable single mode, if you want to really close this ASAP.
Okay, is there any documentation you recommend to update particularly, or are we creating it right now? Emil?
I did not started working on that issue, to be honest. I plan to do it like very soon. So we could basically have that in a single place with all these caveats as well. I may ping you like on that. It's like it's gonna happen like tomorrow likely when I start working on that. I'm kind of close to finishing the other stuff.
Let's please open follow-up issues though for anything we know is broken, not just documented, because otherwise it will just fall through the cracks.
I agree with Matthias. Like if you could open like an issue for each thing that is caveat, we could then. I mean, in any case, we have to link this to this issue from the documentation, right? So it's beneficial to have the issue with as much details and impact as possible, and we can track that and figure out. I'm still kind of thinking that fixing metrics is essential for the, but maybe it's for the 13.10. But we can still run. I think we can run puma single with setting this magic environment variable, and it's very hacky, but it's technically it runs, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
By the way, really great discussion. I think it's really important to highlight these things and to point out when you're blocked, because that's obviously the least productive state to be in. And so it's really good to bring it forward. Thank you.
And I have notes in the team agenda, so in case anybody forgets. All right, next one, Nicola.
Okay. I spent a lot of time lately to like provide a way to run those specs and to untangle what is related to GraphQL and what is not. And we needed to make sure that like running specs for this engine, like for that proposed mechanism, is really simple. And when we continue splitting that application, that it will be still easy to maintain that code and run those specs. And the biggest problem was to make sure that we don't have any cross dependencies between GraphQL and our services. So I really needed to make sure that when we run the specs without GraphQL, nothing is broken, and that we can run the specs separately for everything together and everything without the GraphQL code specifically. And additional problems were where we have front-end specs, like the white box specs that are running everything from the front end, from the browser. And those specs are like requiring GraphQL. So it really needed to, like, it take a lot of time to make sure that everything runs correctly and that we don't have any like blocking points on the proposed architecture. So I was able in the end to like fix almost all of the specs. I think that only one spec is broken currently because today is February and it has 28 days and spec is comparing against 31 days. So it's totally unrelated to the GraphQL, but since today is the 1st of February, the specs are broken. I guess on the master, it will be fixed soon. So, my idea and plan is maybe to pair with someone and start measuring this stuff. And this one can be reviewed. I would ask Camille to do a first review since this is really huge MR, I think I changed almost 2,000 files. I split this into 5 commits, where like 2 commits are only moving the files to the engine. The second one is moving specs to the engine. And there are 3 separate commits, one related to the engine logic itself, one related to fixing the specs, and the final one is only for fixing the CI job, because I added 2 different CI jobs to like run GraphQL specs, and we have the old one without the GraphQL running. So yeah, it's a little bit complex MR.
Nicola, it sounds amazing. Thank you for doing that. Please assign to me. I'm really anticipating to review that. It sounds amazing.
It will be a little bit painful to review, but like we can pair if it's gonna be easier. Yeah.
Don't worry about my pain. You've been already through a lot of pain.
Yeah. So I'm still like I created a separate issue for measuring those performance impacts, but I'm still not sure how to do it. Like I captured some note and proposals from Camille, but I would like to probably pair with someone, because it's not a simple thing to do.
I'm really interested in the single metric, like the simplest possible. Like after you brought up these components, how much USS they use. Like, I mean, with the default settings and like with the settings that we've been kind of playing with Matthias recently, the one that are like the most memory conservative ones, and like regardless of like the time to load application, like the base case scenario after just starting the app, doing nothing really and checking like how much is their memory. And like I'm looking like for the web, there should be basically 0 difference or almost 0. For side key, I'm expecting to see the difference, and I'm just wondering what is this difference.
Me too.
I can give you exactly like the environment variables that you have to use for that purpose. And like whether you run that in the development or not, it's not really that important. I'm just kind of looking for the kind of magnitude type of the value. Is it like 1 megabyte, 5 megabytes, 50, yeah. 100, 500?
At least 500.
I mean, if there would be 500, like you would not have anything to work on. So too easy.
Yeah, I don't think we have that in this table here, so it'd be good to add that in as well. This is where I've been going back to track overall memory reduction. Okay. Let's see, next
I think
one.
It might actually be, we had a couple of very similar issues. It might actually be the one that says, find a mechanism to dynamically load gems.
Yeah.
At least that might be related to it.
Yeah, that's the old name, I think.
Sure. Thank you. All right. Next one, Grant, is there anything left to do on this? I know there's a product question that I posed on measuring the impact of Ruby 2.7, but that's kind of forward looking. It's not necessarily holding this one open.
For this particular issue of measuring the impact, that is obviously now done. We've done it, and we did find that there was some memory increases around database heavy endpoints. I think there's probably more caching going on for some reason, but or for some reason, well, maybe not caching, but it's definitely using more memory to retrieve those from the database. So we'll probably need to try and figure out some time to just look into that, make sure it's fine. The memory increase isn't actually, it's a few gigs, so that's still knowable enough to actually review, but it's not, in reference architecture world, it's not actually, it was already quite under what we give it, so we're not seeing it affect any performance tests or anything else, but it's still worth investigating. So for that issue, you should close it and we should open up another one, just investigate it. That's all above board.
Okay. All right, we'll do that later. Alexi.
Yeah, so as you remember, we rolled back this setting enablement after we found the issue with GC compact with complete gem, and the gem was fixed and patched, and we bumped the version. So currently I just reopened the merge request to bring this setting back. We decided to start with canary and staging first. And I'm just pinging maintainers, ping them again, so to enable this on our Kubernetes installation in our chart. So no actions from my side needed except just ping. I opened 4 merge requests already for this to bring it back and just waiting for them to be merged one by one.
Alexei, I have a question. I'm
Yes.
not sure if you're gonna be able to answer that, but you may be able to answer that later. How it exactly works? Is this GC compact being done before every worker being forked, or only once?
I thought once, but I need to check it. Like I thought we do before even we start anything forking. We just do 4 times GC, then GC compact, then we fork like a multiple workers from the master itself. So that was my understanding.
Okay, I'm curious about that for the
Not
reason.
a type of worker, it is done in the master itself.
Sorry?
So it is done in the master. When the master is loading, it is done once, and then we start working.
Okay, but actually, okay, I mean, like,
okay.
I'm still something to check. I'm asking because, like, if GC compact happens between forking between worker A and worker B, if you have GC compact during that period, it's gonna break completely memory layout because of how the compaction works. Compaction in the Ruby works that it looks at the memory pages that has the least amount of the slots allocated and shuffles these slots into pages that has the most slots allocated. So if we for some reason do this GC compact between the workers, we're gonna actually increase copy on write pages and kind of unlink many of pages. And it's gonna have pretty bad impact on the memory usage. So I think, like, if you could validate that exactly when it happens.
Okay, I don't think it should happen between workers, to be honest, from what I've seen, but I will validate. Thanks.
Yeah, quickly to look at as well. It runs it once during the master boot before it spawns workers, but it runs it again for restart events. So if you can signal it to restart workers, and then it runs it again. So I think there's some subtleties there. So yeah, let's look at this a bit more.
Okay.
I mean, to be honest, be looking at the code, I think it's running before every fork, but it's something to check out.
Okay.
Because this would, I think this would also to some extent maybe explain the kind of strange data that you were seeing, that there was like no big difference, if I remember previously.
Okay.
All right, Matthias.
Yeah, I just spent like the last 40 minutes or so on summarizing the results, and it's pretty good. I updated the issue description with them as well. So there's some juicy numbers in there for release notes. I think we can close it. The last thing that is maybe, so we were like in the end fairly careful with how many of these settings we found work well. We actually apply by default. So I ran like a kind of like a 3-leg comparison. The baseline, which I used 13.8, I just used Omnibus for this, which didn't have any of these optimizations. Then I used the nightly, which uses the new defaults, and that was actually best result. And that didn't even have any of the rubygc tuning. It was just using JE-malloc with our tweaks applied. And that leads to savings of 60% in memory, which is pretty substantial. So that's great. I did then another check with custom GC, settings applied that we thought would work well, but the memory use was actually a little bit worse, which might just be, you get a lot of these fluctuations depending on like when exactly you measure. But it didn't have an improvement. It didn't make an improvement. So I think actually it's pretty good the way it is. So maybe we should just leave it as is and just ship that with 39. So yeah, but Camille, of course, I'm curious what you think. Because I feel like
I'm still thinking that like we should ship the GC settings. I'm kind of still seeing like different values than you, but I think like regardless, they are still like very close what we are seeing. And like this difference that you see in the memory allocation is because of the malloc calls and because you run that with the concurrency of 2, I think.
Okay. Yeah. So another thing where the GC settings helped that I saw just throughout the testing we did over the past few weeks was it definitely helps to keep the memory use a bit more stable. Like without them, you can sometimes get these breakouts because the rubygc is just not as constrained in how many object slots it can allocate. So that's also good to have, right? So that could be another reason for why we would want those in place. I'm just saying, like, even without those, this is already super impactful. So if we wanted to ship just that, that would already be a win. But like, sure, if we want to set GC defaults as well, we can certainly do that. It's just like it will be less obvious, like to what extent they help. I don't think we're going to see a big difference there.
I mean, like at least in my testing, like tuning GC settings, I saw like about 1 and 1.5 megabyte less of the memory usage because
I would even say that's a statistical fluctuation that is like so.
It kind of, because like, I mean, from kind of understanding perspective, how it behaves and how it implication has on memory allocation, it has to be better because as you are saying, like the spiky allocation, they actually being freed more aggressively. And the way how the ratio are configured, Ruby is designed to grow memory significantly in this kind of unconstrained behavior. And it's very hard for the Ruby then to free the memory. You would have to force 20 or 30 GC cycles really to free that memory, which is also not guaranteed in some cases. So I think like the GC settings are important from the perspective that it tries to define, let's say, a medium scenario of the expected memory usage for the average case, basically, and kind of defines like the boundaries that if you go over these boundaries, you can still allocate, but Ruby gonna be more aggressive in freeing memory.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of this. The reason I say this is and I raised this during the retrospective, there is so much work involved. And like, I need to go back and open 4 MRs again, just to add these GC settings as well, in the same way we did it now. And there will not even be a very convincing argument to do it right now because the return on investment will be quite small. So I'm just wondering at this point, if it was up to me, I would prefer to just like say, this is good enough. This is like our 80% solution. And then we go to look at the main app again, because that's should be kind of our focus, not GitLab exporter, right? So that's my only concern we have, because it's going to take honestly another week to do that, and the result is not going to be as impressive as the initial round of. Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking from the different angle that like if we keep it like that, there's gonna be a case where this memory usage of this process gonna grow outside the boundaries that we defined. That's my perspective on why the GC settings are important.
So my question is, can we record this as a follow-up investigation, as in something that we may want to look into? And is it good enough as is to just move on? I don't know what the answer to this is, but
yeah,
if there's significantly more work, for not very much downturn and the risk is relatively low, I would move on.
I think it's a legitimate concern. It's like something where, oh, you know what? So one main problem we had, because what Camille describes is something that's not easily seen if you just run like an A/B bench as we did so far. and just look at the memory use that falls out of this, right? Because that's the immediate effect. But what Camille describes is kind of this like slow creeping, Ruby keeps holding on to more and more memory, and then also the memory allocator cannot really return those pages. But that's only something that happens over like days or so of use. But Camille did add the Ruby probe to GitLab exporter. That's just basically a new feature. That's not completely, that the work is done, but we're still waiting for that to be merged into Omnibus and charts. But if we have this, at least then we can observe memory use and GC stats of GitLab exporter in production. And that would be really interesting to have, because then at least we can point at something and say, oh, so basically we can put like some data behind these ideas that we have.
I'm kind of thinking about like the following, that like if we move on to something different, we're not gonna go back to GitLab exporter because it's gonna be a done story, because like then we may be looking at 5 megabytes or 10 megabytes and we're gonna have significantly more important topics. And I'm kind of thinking that like it's like we are kind of on the top of these items. We know what needs to be changed and where in order to kind of fully conclude that for the time being. So what I'm saying that like you are probably fully right about like that it's really maybe hard to justify that, but I'm pretty confident that we're not gonna go back to it later, because it's not gonna be enough of the improvement for us to consider doing that because of this process being so lightly used compared to everything else. So now if I'm looking at the perspective of the time investment, it's pretty much like something that you, Matthias, know exactly what to do, and like we are on top of that. And it's probably like not a lot of effort to do it, but if you would have to go back to it in 2 months from now, it's gonna be a 5 times more bigger task because of the shifting landscape.
Yeah,
and
it's a fair point.
Not really do it at that point. That's my perspective really. That like
okay.
If we are on top of something, it's like easier for us to finish, close that, and be done with that, and do not go back to it. Because if we have to go back later, it's actually significantly harder to do it.
No, I don't disagree with this. Yeah. So what I would say though is, so the time-consuming part is not just like sending all these MRs and like getting them merged and reviewed and all that. It was so far as well also to play with all these different settings and like find like the perfect combination. It's like sometimes the differences are so subtle, and I found that sometimes you test it on a different day and you get a different result. So like there's all these like external factors that makes them. So basically, long story short, should we then just agree on the latest values that I posted in the result as well to move forward with, so that I can actually focus on producing those MRs and getting them reviewed and getting them in, so that we don't spend like another week on fine-tuning these.
So about which values?
The rubygc settings. I think we set initial slots we wanted to size. It's all in there in the description now. This came out of your latest test.
Yes, I don't really want us to do anything different than that. Like
yeah, okay, fair.
Okay, that with whatever it is. I think like at least from my perspective, it's explainable why we.
Yeah, I agree. I think they make total sense. And what I'm saying is though, I use different settings than those, like a smaller number of init slots and like different values for min max ratio, and I got very similar results. That's what I'm saying. So, but I totally agree. I find like this makes sense. There's like reasoning behind these, and it sounds good to me. So let's move ahead with it.
So you're going to do that, use those values, and then maybe we can move on now, just for time's sakes purpose.
Sounds good.
You know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
All right. On to in-dev. Matthias.
Yeah, I've like kept trying to get back to this. It's basically the same story, but for the main app. So I started to work on this again on Thursday after we made a bunch of improvements that helps to measure this a bit more easily and steadily. But I'm kind of going through the same stuff again that we did for GitLab Export. So this is not done yet.
Okay, Camille.
I actually started like pushing on getting this merge. I'm actually first starting with the GitLab CI testing, and maybe it's gonna be merged today, which is like would be the very first step to have my hacky patch, but patch to be tested more extensively. And I also opened, because I'm actually having the trouble on like propagating this patch. Like it's fairly, I have to propagate this patch to Omnibus, and I have to propagate this to CNG. I have to propagate this patch to GitLab CI testing, and it's still pretty straightforward. And I also like, because it's GitLab CI and it's using Docker images, I also propagated that to GCK. It's basically we're using GitLab CI image and removes a lot of dependencies on the GCK, and it just works as well. But I'm having trouble with the GDK that basically compiles everything from scratch using some external tool named SDF. And I'm not really convinced that I want to propagate this patch there. So I'm trying to figure out exactly the way how to approach GDK, but I think my perception right now is like I'm just gonna likely skip that and rather focus on pushing that and getting that merge upstream. Because we still would have the coverage on the CI, Omnibus, CNG, and as the last resort, GCK. If someone would ever have to modify that, but my perception would be that I would completely disconnect testing of that patch from other specs. I mean, still part of the specs, but disconnect from other specs. So it would still be possible, like to work on that, but application would function without that patch as well. So I think it's already like on the track, to be honest. I'm just kind of figuring out like how others approach my GDK dismissal, at least in this case, given like the complexity of patching GDK. Because it requires recompiling Ruby. I don't want to do it really.
Okay. And you have the next one too on feature flags.
Nothing really happened with that. As you saw, like I asked explicitly in the working group about that, but there is no one yet interested. So I'm kind of unsure, like, how we should, like, maybe I'm gonna just unassign myself. Maybe this is the way really to resolve that problem.
Yep. I would. I'll take a look at that one later.
Because from what I understand, like it's working group gonna like finish that in some or another form.
Yes.
At this moment.
Yep. Yeah, I think you should unassign. All right. Let's jump over to the validation board.
Quick question before we do. Is
Yep.
there anything else that should be on the build board? So something that folks are working on that isn't at the moment? No?
The issue that I created appeared in the open bird, so that's fine.
Yeah. Also, don't reload the board. I think now the workflow and review column is no longer loading. So it's like completely borked. Okay, and do people have enough work on the items that are ongoing until the next call? Or do we need to move more things into ready for development other than the ones that are in here? Estimate.
I do, but the measure performance impact for proposed web engine will be moved on the ready for development, but the board wouldn't load, so I left it in the open board. But
leave it, but okay, perfect. Yeah, the item for the documentation is there for Camille as well, so I think we're good here.
Yeah.
Cool. Cool.
All right. So
go ahead. Super quick review. Craig, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so what we've done here, we are almost out of time, so I'm not sure we can do it. The idea here behind this board is to quickly do a prioritization for what should be done next, right? What should move onto the build board if we, if we're done with most of the things that are on the build board. So these are sort of the immediate next things to consider. I'm not sure if people have moved all of the items on there, but quite a few people pinged me and said, like, here are a few things that we may want to consider. So I don't know if we have enough time to talk through those in detail, but we can maybe at least do the two in problem validation. So my question here is, for the sidekick cluster should preload before forking. Is this one issue that is still related to our 2 gig memory effort, or is that a new thing?
Which one, Fabian, do you ask?
Sidekick cluster should preload before forking.
For the 2 gig, not really.
Okay. Are there any items in here at all that are still relevant to the 2 gig? On the board, that is.
I'm still like looking at this matrix instrumentation. It's something that would be.
I think the third one from the top in the open column would apply, because this only really makes sense for really small. Yeah, this actually is, this would be only make sense for a very small.
Okay, so this is the bottom. Yeah, consider.
Yeah.
Is this something that we may want to move to the build board just so that we can sort of flush it out with closing out the 2 gig issue? Or is there more investigation needed around this before we can actually start?
Yeah, it's like one of these things where it's fairly easy to like show that this is possible in theory. I'm not totally clear yet on what this. It has a bunch of like, I think there will be things that fall out of this. Just to give you one super quick example, right? So if we only have like one process, that this basically is saying I run a single kind of a launcher process, right? And then everything else that's Ruby and part of the main app will be forked off of that. And this gives like us some opportunity to share memory. But this then changes the execution model completely. And like Omnibus, for instance, has this concept of services that are monitored through run it and all these things. So I'm a bit like, I wonder how much extra work would fall out of this. And I kind of have a hard time saying, is it worth doing, you know, because it might add a ton of complexity in other areas, right? It will save memory, but it might add complexity in other areas. So that's why I think it's definitely not ready for development. I think there's some things we would.
Okay, then consider. My suggestion would be, like, I haven't looked at this, so if you've written this down already, please excuse me. But I would just add exactly this into this comment and say, hey, this is where we are at, because this may be one of those instances where, you know, I would suggest, like, depending on how well we've done with the 2 gig, and if we're even going to continue doing this, I may just say, okay, let's put this in the backlog, because it's maybe not worth doing at the moment, because there's too much overhead at the moment, for example, right? And then we don't even need to get it onto the build board.
Yeah, I think I put something in limitations here, which, yeah, I'd like what I just said is in the issue description. So I just don't know what the impact of this would be.
Cool.
But yes, I would also add, like, for a simple case, if your initializer has runtime.sideKey or runtime.puma, it would break as well. You would have to fix that in this model.
That's a good point.
So it actually has like a lot of dependencies to support that way of running application.
Yeah, I don't know.
Let's leave it here. We don't need to discuss it
like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. Sounds hairball-y to me.
Yeah.
So cool. given that we still have enough stuff going on the billboard and we don't have that much time, I think we can continue to add to this, right? And then I need a separate session to review it, and I'll ping folks on it as well.
Just like, I know I keep bringing this up, but I'm like at this point not sure anymore what's going on with Action Cable, and because like there is an issue open to like look into the access memory that we now consume. It's just not on our board because it's not filed with our team. It's like it's part of the team that owns Action Cable, which I guess is fine. I'm just a bit worried that that this is not going to. I don't think this will be a high priority. I think there's a lot of like pressure on this working group right now to just ship something, which we did. So I have a feeling, I might be wrong, but like this might just like not get done. So I just wanted to throw that out there because it's like, I feel it's not really on our radar.
Well, certainly not on mine. So
yeah,
yeah.
I was gonna say, can you give like a quick 1 minute overview of the impact of the latest Action Cable development? It's concerning. So
Yeah, and I can find the issue. I think I've loaded it before, but I can find the issue again as well. So basically, what happened was there were like multiple attempts at rolling it out, and like the first time it didn't work was for unrelated reasons. So we were fairly optimistic. The second time, that was last week, I think, to roll it out, and so we ended up rolling it out, and it worked, but memory consumption on Workhorse is through the roof. It's like, you know, like an ordinary workhorse consumes somewhere like between 200 and 300 megabytes in prod on Kubernetes. Like we saw memory use in Action Cable. On the Action Cable, there's like a separate fleet of servers now that service only Action Cable and other WebSocket traffic. It was like north of 2 gigabyte. So that's a 10x increase. And we have done some research already, like, and we're pretty sure it is simply because all the connections are proxied through Workhorse continuously. So like these users just come and they stay connected even to Workhorse. And that was something we missed before because we thought it would only be involved in the handshake and then Action Cable connects directly to the client, which is not true. So yeah, that's where we're at. And there's some extra like memory use in Puma as well, but it's smaller and we need fewer nodes to support that sort of traffic. Unlike web, we only run a small fraction of the number of Puma workers for our overall site. So that is probably fine. And another thing we haven't looked at all because we don't have the tools right now to do it is how this would behave on self-managed, right? Because we would have to look at, we would kind of have to come up with estimates for which group of Omnibus or HA users that use charts, our charts, like what kind of traffic would they have to expect, right? And this will only get worse going forward because this is one feature, right? This is only the issue assignees. And we had like on SaaS, we had like, I think we peaked at 30,000 connections for issue assigns. And this will of course be elevated for the frequently used features like MRs and issues. But again, that's one feature, right? So we're looking, the whole point of this kickoff and working group was to put the infrastructure in place to build more features on top of this. So I'm not sure where we're headed with this, but like it feels like it's quite expensive to run.
Could you ping me on, or maybe you have, I'm sorry, I forgot. Can you ping me on some of the
I have
this stuff?
pinged you guys, but like I can link it again, yeah.
Yeah.
so yeah. Go ahead, Fabian.
Yeah, so before we wrap up, I think the last thing I wanted to say is, well, I actually want to say two things. So I went through all of our Rise stacked issues for the 2 gig memory stuff, the big, you know, what we wanted to do, and looked at, yeah, 13.1 is 13.10. It just got rounded for whatever reason. You know, where we are at. And I think the short summary is we've actually stuck to our prioritization, right? We started at the top and didn't do the low value things. None of the issues are closed. So they're all in flight, right? But almost all of them are actually scheduled for 13.20 0.9 release. So if we actually optimistically say 70% of those are going to close, right? I think we should be in a position where after this, right, we can reevaluate, specifically the impact that all of those changes have made on memory consumption in a constrained environment. That's how I look at it, right? We won't have like the lowest hanging things here are in the backlog. We haven't done them, but ideally, let's say row 2 to 10, let's say, should close, right? Or wrap up.
Not going to close. I think it's probably 2 to 8 actually.
Yeah, or
yeah. Sorry.
So in general, right? But then I think we should be able to say, having done all of these changes, where are we at? That's sort of what I suspect. And that then should go into the documentation, right? And at that point, we should reevaluate if there's more to be done here or not, right? Or if we are going to say this is the best we could do, right? The rest is going to be very hard. What's the next thing? That's my thinking currently. I'm not sure if people agree with this.
Agreed, and we can keep the epic up to date with the latest progress.
Yep. And then, other than that, and I've said it before, but I just wanted to say it sort of in sync again. So we made a change in 13.7 for the load balancer for caching Postgres queries, and you've seen this, right? We believe, or Yannis believes, that this actually has increased in significant improvements in the query aptex for Postgres. There are probably other things happening as well, right? But it has had a big impact. And like these things really matter to the product organization overall, right? This is like things people get excited about, for better or worse, right? People care about these metrics. And I just wanted to let you know that these types of changes, right, and the things that you work on, they do have a significant impact on GitLab as a whole, right? So, not everything that we do will have such an immediate impact, but I think overall, right, the user experience for our users is going to get significantly better by doing this type of work, right? And even though it's incremental often, right, and it's small changes and whatnot, it does have a huge impact, right? And so I think it's important to remember that in your day-to-day, when you're like bogged down in garbage collection settings and measuring difficulties and changing settings in 5 different projects, right? Which I think sounds sometimes not like that much fun. But at the end of the day, these things are really, really important, right? And they do matter. And I think that was a change where I think that was quite impactful. But I wanted to sort of say that out loud so you don't forget in the day-to-day.
Woohoo!
Yeah.
My motivational speech of the day.
Awesome. All right. We are past time actually. So thanks everybody. Happy Monday. Happy February.
Happy Monday.
Yeah.
You too. Bye-bye.